1,000 mobile phones sold every minute, 7 T-shirts, 3 saris and 4 pairs of footwear sold every second. $5 billion worth of e-commerce sales and nearly 80 million shoppers across all platforms. All of that in just the first week of this festive season. According to a Bain report, 3 out of 5 online shoppers now belong to Tier 2 or smaller cities, and 1 of 3 e-commerce users is Gen Z. India's e-retail funnel is getting bigger and could have 500 million online shoppers in the next 5 years and become the world's second largest base, only behind China. Also propelled by the D2C revolution, India's e-commerce market could triple in size from $50 billion in 2022 to $150 billion by 2027, according to the Bain report. The report also says e-commerce in India is well into its third phase of evolution, one that's being driven by small-towners who are big fans of Reels and the Gen Z who are reportedly spending 8 hours online every day. No wonder that Amazon and Flipkart have embraced live commerce and organized an army of influencers for their great festive season sales this year. E-commerce 3.0 is no longer just click and order, it's more immersive. Flipkart is entering the metaverse with Flipverse. Why not? 1 out of 4 buyers on its platform is using the virtual try-on feature before ordering a makeup product. Social commerce, live commerce, quick commerce, new rules of the retail game are being written by brands hoping to catch new consumers online. Hello and welcome. I'm Shereen Bhan. You're watching Young Turks, India's longest-running show on startups and entrepreneurship. And joining me now to talk about e-commerce 3.0 is Manan Bhasin, partner at Bain & Company, and Kanwaljit Singh, the founder and managing partner of Fireside Ventures, a big investor in many of India's D2C brands. Manan, Kanwal, many thanks for joining us here on the program. Manan, let's start by talking to you. I just rattled off a bunch of numbers that give us the size and scale of the opportunity as well as the headroom and the runway for growth. But what's different about e-commerce 3.0 and the way that it's being adopted and the way that it's playing out?
Super. Thank you, Shereen, for having me. So as you said, the e-tail itself has matured vastly over the last decade or so that we've been tracking this. We've seen 3 phases of growth. Pre-2015 was very much a phase of cautious early adoption. You saw mobiles to be the predominant category. The e-commerce was very much restricted to metro tier 1 cities. Phase 2 of growth was between 2015 and 2020. This is the growth phase. This is an area where tier 2 cities really took on, and you saw a rapid kind of expansion of e-commerce, not just from like horizontal such as Flipkart and Amazon, but also the advent of vertical players. Phase 3 is really a new, or COVID-19, I would say, has ushered us into this era of growth, and this is an era of innovation, in my opinion. And there are 3 hallmarks of this phase which have become amply apparent over the last 18 months or so. The first one is a micro-segmentation of consumers. You increasingly have consumers not just coming from metro tier 1 cities, but also from tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities. You have a lot of consumers coming from low middle income groups. You've got a lot of consumers coming from Gen Z. Now, these are all different consumers. They want discrete, their behavior is discrete, and it's incumbent upon platforms as well as brands to cater to these different consumers differently. The second big hallmark is the idea of different business models, and a lot of platforms are coming up with ideas such as social commerce, video and live streaming, quick commerce, direct to consumer. All of this is becoming much more important. And then finally, it's an era of technology. It's you touched upon it briefly, but this is all of these platforms are really going to use and utilize technology very strategically to deliver a bespoke customer experience to consumers.
Several important aspects that you raised there, including, of course, micro-segmentation, which we are starting to see play out in a much more evolved fashion in the market today. Of course, different business models as well. And what more brands can leverage in terms of technology, what more platforms can do by way of leveraging technology. Incidentally, not a particularly great day for companies like Meta, which have taken a hammering on account of poor numbers. But Kanwal, let's address the issues that Manan was just talking about the evolution, the deepening of the market. The funnel is getting deeper. That is very evident. That's very clear. As someone who's been tracking, observing, and participating in this story for a decade now, what to your mind stands out as the biggest difference this time?
So, I think the depth of the market, like you called it, is really the most interesting factor. It's not occasional shopping. It's not shopping for the one-off kind of items. We are seeing people start now almost adopting digital first for everything that they consume, and it's expanding into even services, into solutions. So I think a way of life has changed, and COVID really was the main, I would say, reason why that happened so quickly, and none of us anticipated that. Second thing that has happened is that because the penetration is going into small town India, it is truly becoming a access game, which earlier was not even available to these consumers. And that is a big change in terms of, because in the urban India, at least, there was a choice to shop from online or offline, and it was more a matter of convenience. But in small town India, rural India, it is actually becoming the only way of life. And as consumers aspire for better, as they aspire for more, it's becoming even more evident that they will probably go digital first. And that really is what excites us. I think the only caveat I would add, Shireen, is that you have to design the business models and the brand narratives for the right audiences. Like Manan said, if you're talking of micro segmentation, what worked for a urban millennial consumer in a big town metro will not work for a small town consumer. So you have to think through the narrative, the brand positioning, you have to think through the size of the SKUs, you have to think through price points. So that is really what brands have to start thinking about. And I think that probably is the next shift and change we will see going forward.
That's very important, and I want to get Manan to comment on that. Manan, as Kanwal was pointing out, that is the transition we are yet to make. This is an opportunity that's opened up. It's an opportunity that has been accelerated on the back of the pandemic. But what works in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore may not necessarily work in the smaller cities and the smaller towns. When you talk about micro-segmentation, and a lot has been said about the likes of Meesho and so on and so forth, are we starting to see business models reorient themselves or orient themselves to cater to these micro segments, to cater to these new niches, so to speak?
Absolutely. I think this is most certainly happening, right? Like, I think if you look at the last 5-6 years or so, Tier 2 has been a very critical component of India's e-retail story. As you rightly said, 60% of online shoppers hail from Tier 2 or smaller cities. The way I've always thought of it is Tier 2 has always had affluence and aspiration. What it's been missing is access, and e-retail has bridged that gap quite effectively. And a lot of business models, specifically as you think about social commerce or if you think about video, live commerce, etc., are very much catered towards these segments. So if you think of quick commerce as an alternative which is convenience-based, less than 30-minute delivery of grocery, it's very much catered towards that metro Tier 1 consumer. These are companies which are not even talking about Tier 2 cities at this point of time. In fact, they're very much saying that we're going to restrict ourselves to the top 8 to 10 cities. When you, on the flip side, you talk about a social commerce platform such as Shopsy or Meesho, very much their growth has come from Tier 3 and smaller cities, and it's really been, they've taken on the mantle of bringing all these new shoppers on board into the fray of e-commerce.
Yeah, and we're seeing that playing out, at least for companies like Meesho, etc. But Kanwal, I want to come back to you. While we are talking about the digital first opportunity and the way that brands are attacking this space, but one thing is also evident, and many of the brands that you're invested in have been talking about, while they're acquiring customers online, they also need to service them offline. So this phygital hybrid model, and in its many shapes and avatars, playing out. What is the interesting aspects of that? Because, whether you talk to a Mamaearth or you talk to Nykaa, while we saw this big move towards digital adoption, it brought down the rate, the acquisition rates as far as customers were concerned, especially through the course of the pandemic. We saw burn coming down, but now everyone's talking about offline expansion. How are you seeing this play itself out?
Very close to my heart, Shereen. Thanks for prompting the question. I would have bunked it in somehow. So, what worked, like Manan said, over the last 10 years was this emergence of the digital infrastructure and therefore the opportunity to build digital first brands. I think the next decade is going to be all about omni-channel. And that is really what excites us the most, because there is a certain cadence and certain rhythm to how online first brands will work. But eventually, India is still going to be 90+ % shopping offline. And the way the brands have to visualize or reimagine their entire channel strategy has to be very different than, say, traditional companies like Unilever or Nestle or Dabur or ITC. And what we are starting to see is that infrastructure coming through. So there are new age distribution companies which are using technology to almost demand forecast and cater to a certain type of offline distribution. And we are seeing that trend becoming bigger and bigger across not just urban India, but even going into small town India. We are seeing logistics, warehousing, last mile, dark store,
Yeah.
so many innovations happening in the infrastructure. And ultimately, it will be a combination. So, if you go back to the basics, Shireen, we are talking about brands, we are talking about how consumers engage with brands. The choice of channel should be where consumer wants it, not where the brands want to position themselves. So I think that is the most interesting phase that we are entering into. And if we can crack that narrative and that business model with the omni-channel play, we can see significantly large brands coming out of India in a big way.
So when we talk about the economics of it, how challenging is it going to be able to work, operate sustainably and profitably in this digital or omni-channel environment?
No, so actually, it is very interesting. What we have seen, even in the early, signs of for the last few years, is that the brand is getting built on online digital channels. So consumers are engaging with the brand more actively. They are working on social media. They are engaging with the brand on various different digital media channels. But they are looking for the products across different, distribution points, including offline. So in one sense, the benefit of the work that brands are doing on the online channels are actually percolating into demand generation at the offline. So that's one big, I would say, a challenge which is addressed. Second is that these companies which have come in, we saw Urans and the Jumbo Tails come out, and now new age companies like Rippler, etc., are offering very efficient distribution models using deep technology, which therefore takes away the burden of distribution from individual brands having to set up their own distribution systems. And I think that is the other breakthrough, which is allowing for the cost to be managed. And third is that in an offline context, while yes, you have to deal with inventory and you have to deal with the cost of distribution, there is also a significantly lower cost of customer engagement, because in digital, you are actually spending a significant amount of money to acquire and retain customers. So there is almost a balancing act. And not surprisingly, some of our companies, like you mentioned, Mamaearth, etc., are actually seeing higher profitability on the offline channel than even on some of the digital channels.
Kamal, I want to talk about the D2C opportunity as well as the D2C challenge. And I know that this is something that you are very closely focused on. Again, all kinds of numbers about the size of the opportunity, whether it's a Bernstein report, which talks about the D2C market touching about $100 billion by 2025, or a KPMG study, which talks about India being home to more than 800 D2C brands as of 2021. You're invested in many of the companies that are in the news and the companies that are making headlines. What do you see as the key challenges in an environment where inflation is starting to impact discretionary spends, where funding is starting to slow down, and there is a certain degree of commoditization in the market at this point in time?
So I think clearly the choice and the proliferation of brands and the barrier to entry becoming so much lesser, especially on the e-marketplaces, is leading to this proliferation. And I would argue that, it's a very good, almost like a wake-up call for our industry or the D2C space to go back to the fundamentals. We always talked about brand values. I mean, Levers taught us that, the first thing you have to really focus on is what really is that value proposition? What are you offering the consumer? Why should they keep buying you again and again? Talk about unit economics. We talk about, the basic business model has to be healthy. and you cannot just keep buying sales at the cost of profitability for perpetuity. So I think brands which understand the significance of these factors today are very well positioned because, like Manan said, we have amazing infrastructure. We have a very, very demanding and a consumer base across all these segments, which is looking for choices, which has never had that opportunity to consume across so many different categories. So the demand side, I think, is phenomenally active and very, very interesting for brands today. It is how you design your business model and how you think about the basics and the foundations right. I think that's where we need to focus on. And it's also incumbent on people like us who are helping these brands find their place under the sun to really deliver on some of these aspects. Because if you get caught up in this narrative of saying, let me grow at any cost and profitability will follow, I think that's a really recipe for disaster, if you ask me.
Kanwal, we did see a bunch of companies head to Dalal Street, and we've also seen what's happened to them post-listing. How confident do you feel about this story being bought into by investors in the public markets? I mean, we saw what happened with Nykaa, and that, in a sense, was a standout in comparison to what happened with the rest of the new listings. But how believable is this story going to be from a public market perspective?
So again, Shereen, the fundamental has to be what is the foundation of the business. You look at the 3 IPOs that happened in the consumer space: Manyavar, Go Colors, and Campus. And all 3 of them were received very well. In fact, the last I checked, all 3 of them have actually grown beyond their listing price and doing extremely well on the bourses. So clearly, if you are creating value and if you are offering something which is of value and differentiation to the consumer, the markets are responding. Now, we believe that if a D2C brand has that foundation, which is strong, and has the right elements to build the business over a long period of time with the profitable business model, then that is exactly what the market is looking for. Because the reality is that there are not enough brands in India. And that is a legacy we have because of the complexity of distribution, etc. So today, there are very few brands which you can call as sustainable and with a headroom of growth. If you can deliver that value proposition to the consumer, I think the market will follow.
Kanwal, before I get Manan back into the conversation, one of the other trends that we have, of course, seen play out in the last few years is the large FMCG companies picking up either completely or a significant stake in some of these D2C brands, whether it's ITC or HUL, etc. Do you see that trend picking up momentum, given the fact that this is also a challenging period at this point in time?
Absolutely. 100%. So, what we, as an investor, what we normally try and see is there are 2 paths to exit for us and for the business. And obviously, the interest of the large strategics, whether it's multinationals or Indian companies, has been extremely high because the realization is that everybody needs to play in this new age, digital first ecosystem. But building a business from 0 to 100, much tougher for a large multinational or a large corporate than taking a 100, 200 crore company to 1,000 crores, because then their efficiencies of distribution, supply chain, quality, production, etc. come in. So it's a very natural opportunity for both, whether you see all the recent announcements that have happened, whether it was Marico, whether it was Wipro, whether it was recently Dabur, made an announcement a couple of days back. So we do see that, there is a very natural tendency from. And as you know, some of them are investors in our fund for the very same reason that they want to be connected with the new age brand ecosystem.
Manan, I'll address this question to you and then come to Kanwal, but let me start by asking you, since you're talking about micro-segmentation in terms of markets, let's also talk about categories which are nascent at this point in time, which you believe are likely to grow further. Where are the opportunities, the sort of untapped potential?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think the penetration headroom is massive across categories is the first thing I would say. And then which means even the mature categories also continue to have more penetration headroom when you compare it versus relatively mature markets such as US and China. But there are high frequency categories which are frequently bought by consumers which have not still taken off in as big a way, right? Like, so fashion is still 10% penetration in India. Grocery is sub 1% penetration in India. So in our view, mobiles, large appliances, electronics has contributed about 45 to 50% of the market up until 2022. The salience of this category is going to come down, and what we'll see is fashion, general merchandise, and grocery is going to together account for about 2/3 of the market come 2027.
Yeah, Kaval, I want you to build on that. You know, whether it's mobile phones, beauty, cosmetics, fashion, these are categories which have built themselves out in India. Indian brands, digitally native, digitally first brands building themselves out. What excites you? You know, you talked about how this is going to be a market where we see a combination of both products and services, the solutions take off. You know, interesting things where we're seeing companies like Boat, for example, make their presence felt in the consumer space, not in a solutions way, but in a product way. Where do you believe we're going to see the next wave of innovation, brand building?
Sure. So, you know, one almost like a horizontal mega theme, which was also a big positive coming out of the COVID pandemic, was the focus on health and wellness. And I think what we have started seeing is across the board, you know, across different customer segmentation, there is a growing, you know, desire and almost concern about what you consume in every form and fashion. You know, whether it is what you put inside your body, what you put on your body, the kind of clothes you wear, the kind of house you live in. There is a growing. So I would say, as a horizontal area, what is good for you, better for you, has been something that we have seen. And again, digital allows for that, because the narrative is built almost on a one-to-one basis with the consumer. So wellness as a space expanding into healthcare is something we are seeing as one big area of focus and priority for us. Second area that we feel is very, very interesting is the whole home space. Because while, you know, we have seen some amount of activity, the beauty and personal care and food and beverages, the home is also another space which is getting really disrupted. Whether it was work from home, whether it was the desire of the new generation to buy and, you know, home proud, as we call it. And therefore, how they design their homes in terms of what they put inside, whether it's decor, the way they cook, the way they you know, actually live on a day-to-day basis, is really getting disrupted. So that's one, again, mega theme that we are seeing some very interesting ones. We are also seeing a lot of interesting opportunity in the pet space, Shereen. And again, you know, it started again as a COVID phenomena where we saw a lot more adoption of pets, but that phenomena seems to be here to stay. And as we know, globally, the pet markets are massive. So we do see that that's another area that will emerge as a big opportunity. Lastly, I just want to mention one thing again, which we have been building on through some early work in the fund, is Indian brands for global markets. And we think that time has come when we start seeing some really large brands getting built for international markets with a lot of Indian sensibilities. And obviously, you know, we have seen themes like Ayurveda, seen things like Indian spices, Indian handicrafts, etc. So that's another, you know, trend that we are observing very closely and actually investing in the space quite actively.
Well, that's interesting. So wellness, healthcare, that of course continues to be an area where investors will put their money where their mouth is, people like Kaval. The home space, the pet space, and of course taking Indian brands global, that is going to be something to watch out for. We haven't really seen that happen in a big way so far. We've made small steps, but perhaps we could be at an inflection point. I don't know. We're doing a show here on the sleep space and how that's going to be an exciting opportunity to look at on our show, Mad About Markets. Kaval, is that something that you're willing to bet on?
Oh, we already have bet on it. So we have invested in a company called the Sleep Company. And I can tell you that is really a very exciting. And sleep tech, not just sleep. and how you can use technology to improve the quality of the sleep and the comfort that you have. And I think that's another breakthrough space which we are very excited about.
Okay, gentlemen, we could have continued this conversation to talk about more of the breakthrough ideas that we're seeing take off in the market, but we've run out of time this evening. We will have you back with us to talk more. But for today, Manan Bhasin, Kanwaljit Singh, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on this edition of Young Turks.